Hello, everyone. Here is Sanaaz. And here we have Srđa Popović, one of the best known activists and political strategists from Serbia, who I'm very honored to have here. How's it going?
It's going really fine where I am in Colorado, so it's kind of surprisingly sunny, and climate change is treating us well around New Year's Eve. So,
Okay. In your experience with movements like the one in Serbia, that you also had a key role, the overthrowing of the president, how did the national identity play a role?
speaking about the movements, it's really interesting. So, I started as a Serbian activist, ended up running Canvas, the organization which trained activists from maybe 60 different countries. And of course, each story is different, each background is different, each identity is different, but there are principles which are same. And these principles we call the holy trinity of success in nonviolent struggle. To win, movements need unity and vision. To win, movements need planning. And to win, movements need discipline, most notably nonviolent discipline. National identity, generally the identity, is a very important thing because it shapes the value. So the first thing you do when you work with movements, when you train movements, you teach them to analyze the political and social battleground. And of course, this battleground is made of constituencies, which are the groups of people you need to nonviolently mobilize towards the change. Societies are different, ethnicities are different, religions are different. Very important thing for example, difference between Iranian and Serbian society is not only in the religion, it's also in demography. Iranian society is far younger. So taking a look into all of these social groups, you need to figure out what may be the smallest common denominator to move them. And it very often means the belt narrative. Dictators, for many reasons, tend to use this nationalistic, I am the state, if you are not for regime, you are against the state type of narrative, which kind of stabilizes them, which is very important to understand for movements, how to pull this carpet under their rugs. In Serbian movement, we had this, in late 90s, we had this crazy guy called Slobodan Milošević, who decided who will run his state power by pushing Serbs against everybody else. And this is the rare tool in the dictator's arsenal, this idea that you are not Serb good enough if you don't hate Croats enough. The same way you see this in Russia, you're not a good Russian enough if you don't hate Ukrainians and think that they're all Nazis, or you are not.
But by nationalism, I think we should come to a common ground that we're not talking about, racism. We're not talking about the religious kind of nationalism that we had at some points. Nationalism, like reclaiming political and democratic rights, right? To have
in many cases, you have this national identity being stolen by the governments, and this is and very often the movements reinvent.
What happened, for example, the revolution itself was not a nationalist revolution. It was two big groups as left and the religious group who got together and made this happen. So the result of it is also everything against a nation and nationalism. What do you see as parallels?
So the most important parallel you see is this power to the people idea, where the people do have power to change governments. And Iran, together with Venezuela, is one of the two most blocking cases, where you show the country which has the vast natural resources, amazing human resources, lots of educated people, great cities, great natural goods, and still live in power. If Iran and Venezuela were run by a regional government, for example, you would have pension funds for the grandchildren of the people who lived, like it is case in Norway. So it's and then when you take a look at what's bad with this government, you're looking to two very different governments. Venezuelan government is left, Iranian government is right. Venezuelan government is non-religious socialist. Iranian government is very religious. But these are both autocratic bad governments, which rule in the interest of minorities. So regardless of the color, regardless of the ideology, idea that people have power to keep the government accountable and to ask simple questions like nowadays in Iran, you have the nationwide shortages of electricity and oil. In the country with one of the largest oil reserves, we produced one of the largest quantities of energy in the world. Myself, who is responsible for this? And the ability to ask this question without being thrown to jail is the main difference between the normal place and abnormal place. And I think what happens here and what happens in many of these governments, the vulnerability of this regime doesn't lie in hitting their narratives and stuff like that. These governments are pretty well with their narratives. It's in the simple fact that they cannot deliver. They're so fanatic, so corrupt that they cannot deliver the basic goods with the tools that they are provided. They already wasted too much credit with people within the story. Also, interesting thing around is the demography. It's a very young society. Majority of the people was born after the revolution, and staring them with a previous evil regime, Trump as a boogeyman, looks like a memory or the place from a different age from them. So instead of feeding them narratives, people are asking the questions: what's about the school system? What about electricity? What about the future? What about the jobs? What about the salaries? What about the roads? And understanding that the vast resources of Iran are wasted in funding the proxy war from Yemen instead of giving elementary school in Isfahan. That's where the things start. And for the people living to this elementary school, because it's pretty inexplainable how come that after many years of sitting on such a vast reserves, you were unable to enable people electricity, road, or affordable goods.
Exactly. And people are also like comparing the situation like before and after the revolution. What do you think was the reason that, from the white revolution that the late Shah, Mohammad Reza Shah, gave the land lords their fields and their lands and the contracts, the right of them to have the land for themselves and to work for themselves, giving the rights to women, like, for example, to vote at the time that many Western countries didn't have that. What happened from the constitutional revolution and movement from people that they wanted democracy, they knew what is democracy and what to fight for, to come to a revolution that was a mixture of, religion, like radical Islamist ideas and left, then the common ideas between them made such a result as we see now. What do you think has happened in between?
It's not the simple case. It's not the single case in Iran that revolutions have been taken over by the most organized groups. And if you have all over Arab Spring, you have the situations in which you have a wipe of the people in 2011 in a place like Tunisia and Egypt, and these revolutions were predominantly secular, urban-driven. They ended up with a very conservative people coming back to place, or with the military coming back in a safe place, a place like Egypt. Why so? Because there was no transition. So one of the most vulnerable points on every people power revolution, and Canvas did extensive research on this, is transition. So it's not only challenging the bad regime, it's not only making bad regime to concede or even step down from the power, it's what comes. It is like we can take a look at the Syria, which is a different case. You had a civil war and have a violent overthrow of government. What was happened there? So now everybody was very thrilled seeing the Senate fleeing to Moscow. But what will come there? Which groups will take over? When we have elections, how will give it back to the people? This one will take to the news outlets just leave the country. They don't care about this power because it's, of course, less sexy for news media than the mass gatherings or protests or police shooting the people or civil war. So I think it was a lack of transition plan from the people who did revolutions. It was the fact that there was a well-organized religious group which took over, led by Khomeini. And this is exactly why we should be looking in the future and say, okay, if something happens in Iran, we make sure it's ruled by the people for the people. And this doesn't matter if we have one election system or one constitutional system or not. It is how the people are allowed to participate in the creation of this system. And we have got to the place in Iran where elections are not, rubber stamp thing like now that nobody participates, except for the people, vetoed by the Supreme Guardian Council or whatever. To the place when elections are seen is a place where people do elect their representatives and which are seriously competitive. So for me, importance of what went wrong goes less to the ideological side of things and more of the participation side of things. How do you make sure that if a lot of people participate in a political social change, which may or may not be the revolution, you can name it however you want, how do you make sure that this is effective in whatever government comes next. In terms of we have the participatory government, which is elected by the people for the people, and it is accountable to the people. Once again, coming back to Iran, I think the most vulnerable place of this regime is accountability. They just simply cannot explain how they cannot deliver with all the resources they have, and they're giving people the revolutionary slash religious fairy tales. They cannot explain how do they think to move on with such a large population of young people who are undereducated, with underdeveloped opportunities, who will leave the country eventually. And by the way, keeping a part of the population, the women, completely suppressed. So there is no plan for this thing. This is unsustainable. And it will only become more unsustainable as whatever is left in the budget grows thin. Mass suppression is the most expensive way to maintain it. Kinetic pressure on so many millions of people requires such vast resources that the government is simply too broke to continuously oppress people. It is better time when this thing will come.
How is the leadership role affect everything in movement, in success or failure of a movement?
Well, leadership is crucial for so many different reasons. And talking about the social movement, it can be many different types of leadership. In open authoritarian regimes, and Iran definitely drop into this category, classical political leadership is not functional. So the way these regimes are working great by completely destroying or expelling credible opposition and creating the fake opposition parties inside the countries, which then participate within this system. On one hand, there is a plenty of people outside Iran who are, by the way, hopelessly, segregated and don't talk to each other and are so difficult to unite along the ideology lines. I think understanding the movement as a place where you need to find the smallest common denominator, understanding that the smallest common denominator at this point between the different fractions abroad, but also between the people who are inside Iran, the change will come from Iran. It won't be orchestrated from outside. It won't be the foreign powers removing the government and just putting somebody on. This is how sustainable things happen. And I don't see the lack of tolerance and the human quality in to exercise this. So finding this most common denominator will probably getting around, resetting around to the ground, to the place where people really can decide in which type of system they want to live, because too long they've been denied this system. And understanding that it is the people who are living now there, who are completely different generation than the generation from 80s, may decide to live in a monarchy, republic, or whatever type of system they want to decide to live. And giving them the opportunity to decide to this is probably the place where we should thought. And that may be the smallest common denominator for the different groups from left to right, Republican, monarchic, religious, super secular, this kind of stuff. I also think we are underestimating the power of demography. The Soviet regime is underestimating the power of demography. Iran is a young society. The demographic pyramid shows that younger and younger generations are coming there. What they want may be very different from politicians their 60s and 70s want, or all parts in their 50s, like myself, think that they may want. We need to give these people power to decide, because now they are the majority. And one of the problems with Iranian society, and Khamenei is just idea of this. It is like with people in their 70s and 80s, why majority of the population is under 25? It's a kind of misogyny and inadequacy and ageism of its own. Maybe like 1% of the oldest people in the country, really 30, 40, 50% of the younger people in the country. It's a very different way of discrimination than the racism, and it's not based on the color of skin. But we need to recognize the reality. If we want a stable government in Iran, it should be the government that majority of the people serve.
So I should just make a point that, sadly, dear Srja, I have your voice very bad.
Okay, I'll try to do it this way.
That's exactly true about, having the opinion of the new generation, which can be totally different from the previous ones. And interestingly, the new movement, Zan Zendegi Azadi, has been led mostly by the new generation. And there is the conflict now between the new generation and many who have stood on their position to make this revolution happen. Interestingly, there's so many between these groups that see the common ground purpose of overthrowing this regime and reaching democracy, to see the importance of leadership during this time, of a person who's not claiming any position for himself. And as we see, and as we know his resume and, family and everything, and he's apparently the most trusted person, but there are also anti-movement moves against him. Are there special tactics in such situations?
To be honest, when you take a look at this struggle, it has its three phases. And in this phase, it is crucial for groups outside the country, where the groups around Mr. Pahlavi, where the groups who are not supporting him, to have a clear idea what is their role and what is the role of the people in the country. And very importantly, it is very important for diaspora not to see that there are compromising people in the country, because people in the country can easily say, okay, you don't know how it is to live in Iran. At the same time, there is a very important role of diaspora to support political health, to talk to the governments and raise money. Iranian diaspora today is, if you put them in one room, they are more rich than the Iranian regime. Why this money is not fueling towards democracy in Iran, why these people cannot agree how to raise money to help democratic groups in Iran, is easy for Iranian diaspora. It's not something I can answer. At the same time, taking a look at the leadership in the country, these people are against the regime, but you don't see the sign of the well-organized movement. One reason for this is that the regime is going like this. And whenever you hear the local leadership, they go against the local leadership. Still, if there is a decentralized movement in the country which is able to put pivotal pressure on a pretty weak regime at this point, if this regime is forced for concessions, or Khamenei gets in a plane and gets his own little house or wherever he escapes, if the people take over in Iran and if the transitional government is formed, then we come to the question what form of a rule we have. I think what we say in Serbia is like you are cooking you are making cooking the pot while the rabbit is still in the forest. Just like you have this regime in place, and it's pretty repressive. What you want to know is people will follow the plan. If there is a clear plan for future, people will follow it. So on one hand, building a strong movement which is capable of capitalizing the weakness of the regime inside, connecting this movement to the unified idea of how diaspora can help without making their own solution and imposing it to the people in Iran. And then finding the smallest common denominator, which is, okay, we all agree we want this regime out. We all agree we want some form of free constitution. We all agree we want equality for ethnic groups and women. And then around that, we all agree that we want a system in which government is elected, not appointed by the group of religious scholars. And if this is what we agree, let's build around this. And this is where the unity kicks in, and this is where the negotiations kicks in, and this is where the combination of unified effort of diaspora to weaken the regime even further and support movement within the country, and the effort of the movement within the country to keep government accountable and eventually bring it to the consensus negotiations or downfall. So we see the three phases of this. Stage one, understanding what may be the smallest common denominator, teaching out all the things that we disagree upon and leaving only the things which we agree upon, and building the credible diaspora groups, or uniting existing credible diaspora groups around it, together with helping the movement inside the country. Second step, running an orchestrated and well-coordinated campaign inside and out to bring this regime into concession with the people. Once again, unlike others, I think this regime is weaker than it was before, and it has something to do with its war adventures, which have been lost, but it has a lot to do with it became unsustainable economically. And this is the biggest problem of the Iranian regime. Pressure, absolute pressure costs very much, and they're so losing money that they cannot provide the electricity, not to mention the salaries for military and people who oppress people. This is going to be the next question for them. And then eventually, if the change is perceived, if it's perceived in orchestrated and nonviolent manner, if the minds are clear, then you can have orderly transition where people inside the country and people outside of the country can agree on the type of system that they want. If it's done in a chaotic way, then maybe there is a radical group inside the regime which will try to take it. So once again, in the times of vacuum, military groups, radical groups are very likely to take over. This is what happened in Iran. This is what happened in Egypt. This is what happened in so many different places. The way to prevent it is to have a nationwide participatory movement with clear demands. These clear demands should be accepted by the people, and that will prevent any fighting to take it over and turn it their own way. The idea is to figure out what you want and what you don't want. So the goal is not overthrowing the government. The goal is to have a different, prosperous, democratic union. Figuring out what may be the smallest common denominator between the people you want to mobilize. Figuring out how to empower people within the country, how to empower the protests within the country, and how to build the comprehensive movement to keep this government kind of bay. And how to put a price tag on oppression, how to put a price tag on oppression over women, how to put a price tag on sending outfits to jail. How to build this.
Still there, how can we be nonviolent against a government which is, doing everything violent to us?
First, nonviolence is easy. First of all, understanding that nonviolent movements historically have twice bigger chance to succeed than the violent movements. And this is the study called Why Civil Resistance Work, published in 2008, looking into 320 cases of violent and nonviolent uprising, figuring out that nonviolence really works. Getting it to the simple understanding that in Iran, if you want to be a violent and you try to organize violent uprising, this is trying to box with Mike Tyson. It is the government which has military, it is the government which has police, and the last thing you want to do is challenge them where you're strong, where you're weak and they are strong. As opposed to that, organizing mass demonstrations, organizing small acts of resistance, and eventually things like non-cooperation and general strikes, it is when they are weak and you're strong. And one nationwide strike, like a few years ago, can scare the hell out of the regime. And you use military to make people work. One of the reasons why non-cooperation tactics, and that includes the boycotts and strike, work, is because they are unrepressible. You can kill me, but I'm still not going. So taking a look into how you set up your strategy, it's not only understanding ideologically that violence is, something bad and nonviolence is something good. So it's not only an ethical thing, it's also a strategic thing. It's also, when you take a look at the protest, it is one thing to send 10,000 people on the square and then they can be easily contained by the riot police. It is yet another people to have 10,000 people hitting pots and pans from their windows. But the capability of government to stop it is still smaller, because then they need 20,000 police to send to everybody's home. So understanding these things strategically and tactically is something movements can agree upon, and it has nothing to do with the geography or religion or background. It's very much common sense thing to figure out how to defeat your opponent where your opponent is weak and you are strong. So unity, once again, thinking about that we have this one big thing to do first, and that big thing is to make sure that the regime goes to history, as opposed to what comes next. And we give what comes next to the people on some kind of plebiscite is a big thing. We had this problem in Serbia. We had 19 opposition parties running against Milosevic. They were ranging from far left, which means gay marriages, and far right, which means religious education in schools. And these people couldn't stand each other or sitting at a table with each other. But when we said, hey, until we take presidential elections, will you implement the gay marriages or religious education in schools? You will never get it to the parliament because the regime will steal elections. So whatever you're standing for, you need to understand that first we need to get to some form of democracy. And then we can be all over each other's throats when it comes to the divisive questions. Another way the formula is you need to agree the smallest common denominator, what to agree upon, but you also need to agree what you disagree. And leave what thing that you disagree on for later.
That's right. Thank you so much.